Hi, everyone. So this semester, before each module, I'm going to have a little video for you, just kind of a lecture. I'm old school. I've got a dry erase board for us. Some of our talks will be with PowerPoint and images that I share my screen with, but some of them are just going to be some basic ideas to get things across. And I'll mix it up a lot as we try to figure out what works best for all of us in this format. So our topic for discussion and for learning this week is Reconstruction. And you've got some good readings on this. You've got the book chapter and you've got the crash course video on this. But as you move through these materials, I want you to think about what that really means. What does Reconstruction mean? And for a lot of the terms that we're going to use this semester, I'm going to want you to break down those basic words. So the basics of this is to reconstruct. And then we can break that down even further into re and construct. And so when you're thinking about the idea of Reconstruction in this period of time that we call Reconstruction, I want you to think about what it is we're reconstructing or constructing. And really it is the reality that the Civil War was so devastating in the United States. It was completely obliterated so much of the South and damaged much of the North. The very fabric of the nation had been destroyed, the political structure, the economic structure, and a lot of just the basic social structures and realities. And so there's going to be a number of different ways that we try to reconstruct or put back together the United States of America and make this a whole again. Remember the Confederate States, and you've had this if you've had the first half of American history, the 1013 course, which is the other required portion of this class for graduation. It's okay if you haven't had it. You can take it again next semester if you wish. But this idea of the Confederate States of the South, of the southern portion of the United States, broke away. They declared that they were no longer part of the United States. They separated themselves from the United States of America, and they were no longer the United States. So these were traitors to the nation of the United States. These were people who decided that they were no longer Americans and were no longer going to be a part of it. The Union fought to stay together. Right, the Yankees and the Union fought to bring those southern states back in the fold of the United States and to stay back a part of one country, to have one nation. And so that's what the Civil War was, this idea of bringing it back together. Of course, those Confederate states separated on the policy of slavery, and I think that's important to recognize. Some people talk about it as states' rights. And it was about states' rights, but it was about the states' right to keep slaves. That was at the heart of it, that piece of it. So when we're talking about reconstructing, we're talking about reconstructing the nation, right? So reconstructing the nation as a whole. And then we're talking about reconstructing the South, right? Those former Confederate states. Right, those former Confederate states. And we're talking about how we're going to put those together and what we're going to do. Okay? Here we go. See the magic of pausing, right? So when you're going through your reading and when you're looking at your lecture, I want you to look at the three basic parts of the southern states of the former Confederacy that we're going to be reconstructing. And it really is a complete shift and a complete change of the entire southern states. And we're going to do this in three areas. We're going to do this in the political aspect of it. Right? We're going to politically reconstruct the South. The South has separated from the Union, which means they no longer have representatives to Congress, they no longer have senators, they no longer have governors that work with the United States. So we're going to have to completely restructure and rebuild and reconstruct those political aspects of the South. Right. We're going to also rebuild or reconstruct the economic realities of the South. Remember, much of the Southern culture, Southern economic culture of this time period was based around slavery. Not all of it, but it was a very agricultural portion of the United States, and much of it was structured around slaves. If you think about it, the wealthiest people in the South had slaves. Most people didn't, but the wealthy did. And much of their economics was tied to slaves. Rather than reinvesting in land or reinvesting in technology, they reinvested in slaves. Now slaves were free, which means they lost a huge part of their economy and a huge part of their wealth. I don't feel sorry for them, just to be clear, but that takes a restructure. How are we going to do this? What are we going to do? We've got millions of people who are now no longer slaves. How do we integrate them into society, into the economy of society? You've got thousands of acres of farmland that are no longer being taken care of by slaves. So how do we restructure that? Right? This was a manageable problem. This is something that could be done, but it took some time and some thought to try to do it. Okay. And then the third part I want you to look for in your lectures and in your readings, or as you're looking at this, is the social reconstruction of the South. Remember, you've got this complete restructuring of the South. Who's in charge? Who's not in charge? What happens to those former slaves now that they're free? How do they integrate into society? How do they create their own society? So you're going to be thinking about things like the Freedmen's Bureau, right? And this is something that your textbook talks about a lot, is the Freedmen's Bureau. And you can see again, the core of this is freedman, right? But this was a government-paid effort to, I forgot the U here, right? The government-paid effort to get an education, get skills beyond the agricultural limitations that had been in place for slaves, to give them new opportunities so they could become an equal part of society. Also on the social aspect, think about the realities that the former slaves didn't have the opportunity to have their own churches, right? So you see the building and the growing attendance to churches that are run and controlled by former slaves, and that black church has become such an important part of that community, even through to today. We'll talk about it again when we get to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s and how central those black churches were to those communities. They were a safe space. They were a segregated space on purpose. They wanted it to be segregated. So, this social aspect, how do people fit in society? And what about poor whites? How do they now fit? Where they'd had a lot of positioning where they were better than the slaves because they were free, and now the slaves are free, and poor whites are often economically in the exact same position as the poor blacks, right? These freedmen. So how do we structure that? How do we get through in society? In reality, if these two groups of people had teamed together, they would have been able to achieve a lot. But we'll see that the wealthy whites of the South are able to play racism and tie themselves to poor whites to keep poor blacks down. And we'll see that carry forward. Okay. So as you're thinking about Reconstruction and you're looking at these different ideas, think about, what are we reconstructing? Why do we need to reconstruct? And what's that got to do with it? You're going to look at political, economic, and social aspects of Reconstruction as well.